The first time I saw her smirk like that, I knew it would stick with me. Olivia was perched on the edge of my kitchen counter, legs crossed, red heels dangling over the tile. She held her coffee like a weapon, sharp and precise, eyes flicking to the knife edge of my life that she had just dissected. "You really think anyone will stand with you?" she said, her voice velvet wrapped around ice. "No one will. Not your family. Not your friends. You'll be alone." I didn't respond. I didn't even flinch. The words sank straight into the spaces I had worked so hard to fill with sawdust and sunlight, and I felt them settle like dust on an unfinished beam. I was Ben, 37, a man who built houses that smelled of cedar and linseed oil, a man who measured value in joists and joints, not applause or accolades. I had learned long ago that silence was sometimes louder than argument. Behind her, the morning light spilled across the kitchen I had designed, casting long shadows over polished oak countertops and exposed rafters. This was my world, deliberate, tactile, real. And yet she looked at it like it was a stage set for someone else's life. She loved the house, yes, she loved the image it projected. But the hands that built it, the hours I had poured into the beams and floors, were invisible to her. She admired the walls, not the work, not me. I traced the grain of the wood on the counter absent-mindedly, letting the smooth texture ground me while she rehearsed her lines, each syllable a calculated dart. Her beauty was sharp and strategic, like a compass pointing straight to my insecurities. She thrived on the spaces I didn't occupy, the conversations I wasn't part of. I knew she saw my family the same way she saw my hands, tools to manipulate, windows into a world she coveted but never understood. The room felt smaller somehow, compressed by the weight of her presence and the things she didn't say. Outside, the wind shifted, scattering fallen leaves across the driveway, a subtle echo of the unsettled life she carried in with her. I sipped my coffee, letting the warmth anchor me. This was the morning my equilibrium began to fracture, though I didn't know it yet. She was leaving, but not just the house. She was attempting to leave me, alone, exposed, questioning every choice I had ever made. And I let her, because sometimes the only way to see what you are made of is to watch the storm hit and stand in its path. She left that morning with a suitcase in hand and a confidence I couldn't match. Olivia had always moved through the world like she was rearranging it for her own advantage, and now she was upgrading, stepping into the life she thought she deserved. Greg's downtown condo, expensive cars, polished suits, everything she wanted that I couldn't give, not in style, not in spectacle. And somehow, in her mind, it made me the failure. I walked through the house after she left, the sound of the door clicking shut behind her echoing in the empty rooms. The light slanted across the floors I had sanded myself, and for the first time, I really saw the silence. It wasn't just absence, it was judgment, the echo of every glance she had ever thrown my way when she thought I wasn't looking. It was the unspoken critique of my family, the subtle shrug, the quiet doubt I had carried with me for years. Olivia had known exactly where it hurt. She had watched me at family dinners, noticed the way my father's brow lifted slightly when he introduced me as a carpenter, the way my mother's eyes flicked to my hands, rough and honest, instead of her silverware-polished ones. And she used it against me like a scalpel. In one sentence, she had unraveled years of confidence I hadn't realized I was holding together. I went into the workshop, ran my fingers over the edge of a half-finished cabinet, and let the smell of sawdust fill my lungs. The workbench felt like a lifeline, the rhythm of the plane across oak like a heartbeat I could count on. But even here, in the world I had built for myself, her words lingered. Alone forever. No one will take your side. The echo was louder than the motor of my tools, louder than the hum of the city beyond the walls. Then came the quiet realization, maybe she was right. Maybe I had spent my life defining myself against my family's expectations, carving out a life they didn't fully respect, and now it had left me exposed, vulnerable. The thought was suffocating, a fog settling over every beam, every joint, every corner of my life. And yet, beneath it all, a small, stubborn pulse refused to break. Somewhere in that tension, between despair and defiance, between what was lost and what could still be reclaimed, I felt the first flicker of resolve. I didn't know how, I didn't know when, but I knew one thing: I couldn't stay under her shadow forever. The storm she brought into my house had opened a door, and I had to decide if I would step through it or let it close behind me. 2 days passed in a haze of routine that felt more like punishment than living. I went to the workshop, ran through client calls, measured, cut, sanded, but everything felt muted, as if someone had drained the color from the walls I had built. The house was still solid, still standing, but I wasn't. I found myself staring at the floorboards I had laid with care, imagining them cracking under the weight of her words. Alone forever. No one will take your side. On the third night, I sat in the kitchen with a mug of coffee growing cold in my hands, the faint smell of burnt toast lingering from breakfast I hadn't eaten. My phone sat beside me, silent. My father's number blinked back at me like a distant lighthouse I had refused to see for years. I had avoided calling him, avoided the judgment, the formality, the quiet disapproval that had colored every interaction since I was a boy. But something shifted that night, something that felt like a crack forming in the wall I had built around myself. I dialed, my hand trembling. The line rang twice, 3 times, and then his voice came, familiar yet distant. "Ben?" Formal, measured, cautious. I swallowed hard, realizing how long it had been since I had really talked to him. "Dad," I said, voice tight. "I need to talk. Something's happened." I told him everything. Not in sobs, not in dramatic flourishes, but in the precise way I might explain a problem on a job site. The betrayal. The manipulation. The crushing isolation. Each word was a brick laid in reverse, dismantling the wall I had built around myself. For a long moment, there was silence. I braced for the critique I had rehearsed for decades, the quiet disappointment that would feel like a hammer striking my chest. Instead, his voice shifted. Simple, raw, concerned, the tone of a man who remembered holding his son in his arms when he was small. "Where are you?" he asked. "I'm home," I said. "Stay there," he said. "Your mother and I will be there soon." The words were both a promise and a shock. Relief surged through me, unsteady and unfamiliar. For the first time in years, I realized I wasn't as alone as I thought. The people I had feared would never take my side were coming, unasked, into the room I had once imagined empty. And in that realization, something shifted. The storm Olivia had left behind had exposed more than pain, it had revealed possibility. That night, as I waited for them, I understood that the story wasn't over. It had changed, twisted, and now the path forward would be defined not by fear, but by who I chose to call my own. The headlights swept across the driveway before the car even stopped. My chest tightened, an old knot of anticipation and fear surfacing as the front door opened. My father stepped out first, solid and deliberate, the lines on his face deeper than I remembered. Behind him, my mother followed, carrying an unspoken calm, the kind of presence that steadied everything around it. I wanted to flinch, to retreat into the walls I had built, but something in their posture, unyielding, patient, unshakable, made me stay rooted to the spot. We didn't exchange small talk. We didn't preface this reunion with excuses or apologies. My father simply gestured for me to lead them inside. The rooms were empty, stripped of Olivia's presence, the air heavy with absence but also with possibility. My parents walked slowly, taking in the spaces I had crafted, and I realized for the first time they were seeing more than the walls, the wood, the finish. They were seeing me. "Ben," my father said quietly, standing in the center of the living room. "Tell us what happened." His voice lacked judgment, lacked the measured cadence that had always left me feeling inadequate. It was raw, immediate, seeking connection. I told them. Every betrayal, every word, every insult Olivia had hurled. I spoke plainly, without tears, letting the weight of it rest on the table like tools left after a long day's work. I expected silence, or the faintest sigh of disapproval, a gentle reminder of the difference between us. Instead, their eyes softened, searching for the boy they had raised beneath the layers of dust and sawdust. When I finished, my mother stepped forward, placing her hand lightly on my shoulder. "Ben, we see you," she said. Her voice trembled just enough to carry years of unspoken acknowledgement. My father nodded, and for the first time, the careful, distant man I had always known was gone. "We were wrong," he said simply. "We failed to show it. But that ends tonight." I felt a warmth spread through me, tentative but insistent, as if the very walls I had built with my own hands could finally hold something more than silence. The tension in my chest eased slightly, replaced with a fragile hope I had long buried under pride and fear. And yet, beyond the doors, beyond the driveway, I knew Olivia was out there, convinced she could manipulate my family, convinced that she had left me isolated. That knowledge made the victory partial, unfinished. There was one more confrontation coming, one more moment when the full measure of loyalty, love, and resilience would be tested. Tonight the stage was set. I was no longer alone, but the real reckoning, the moment that would define everything, had yet to arrive. The doorbell rang sharp, insistent, cutting through the evening air like a blade. My father answered before I could reach it, his hand steady on the frame. Outside stood Olivia, her face carefully composed, the practiced mask of panic and elegance she had perfected over years. In her hands she clutched the remnants of the life she thought she could impose on mine. Ben, I need to explain." Her voice trembled, but only just enough to seem authentic. My father didn't move. He didn't invite her in. He simply stood there, solid, immovable, the embodiment of every quiet authority I had longed for but never claimed. Olivia launched into her performance, tearful, articulate, rehearsed accusations of instability, financial cruelty, and betrayal. She painted me as the villain, her life as the victim of my sudden wrath. Her eyes searched the doorway for any sign of support, any hesitation, any doubt, but there was none. "He is my son," my father said, voice low, unwavering. The words landed like a hammer strike, deliberate and final. "You hurt him. You misunderstood him. You mistook our family's complexity for indifference. You thought you could isolate him, control him, and you were wrong." Olivia faltered. The confidence she had carried like armor dissolved under the weight of truth she had refused to see. My mother stepped closer, placing a hand lightly on my father's arm, a quiet affirmation of solidarity. She didn't need words. Her presence said everything. "You are no longer his problem," my father continued. "And you are certainly not ours. Do not come to this house again. You are not welcome." The finality of it struck her like ice. For the first time, the world she had built, full of borrowed status, borrowed luxury, borrowed influence, collapsed. There was no audience, no jury of friends to cheer her performance, no sympathetic eyes to validate her narrative. Only the door, solid and closed, and the family she had underestimated all along. She lingered a moment longer, stunned, then turned sharply, suitcase in hand, and walked away. Her steps echoed against the pavement, empty and hollow, fading into the dusk. I didn't follow. I didn't need to. The silence that followed wasn't oppressive, it was full. Full of the unshakable certainty that I had been right to reach out, to stand, to trust. My family was here, not in theory, not in expectation, but in the uncompromising, tangible reality of love and loyalty. For the first time in years, I breathed fully. The storm had passed, leaving behind not ruin, but clarity. I wasn't alone. I had never truly been alone. The house was alive again, but in a different way than before. It wasn't the buzz of arguments, or the quiet tension of unspoken judgment that filled the rooms. It was laughter, warmth, and the steady rhythm of people who belonged. My parents moved through the kitchen, chopping vegetables, tasting sauces, lingering in corners I had once felt too small to occupy. My sister Eleanor unpacked the last of Olivia's abandoned boxes, her loyally precision softened by a quiet affection I hadn't noticed before. I stood on the deck I had built, tracing the grain of the railing, letting the sunset wash over the yard. My father joined me, hand resting lightly on my shoulder, a gesture that said everything words never had. "You've built more than a house, Ben," he said. "You've built a life." One we're proud to be part of. I realized then that the house had never been about bricks or timber. It had been about creating space for trust, for connection, for resilience. Olivia's departure had ripped the old illusion away, leaving me with something far sturdier. I wasn't alone, not in the way I had feared. Not ever again. The past weeks had been a lesson in loss and reclamation. Financial ties were severed, emotional manipulations dismantled, and the illusions that had held me back peeled away like old paint from the walls. Olivia's absence was a shadow, but it was no longer a weight. The storm she brought had cleared the air, and the sunlight that followed felt earned, tangible. That night, we ate together. My mother's hands worked with the same care she had shown when I was a child learning to hold a knife properly. My sister told a story that made us all laugh until the sound echoed across the empty spaces Olivia had left behind. My father and I sipped whiskey on the porch afterward, talking not of failure, but of possibility, of projects unfinished, of days yet to be claimed. I understood at last that love isn't always a grand declaration or an easy triumph. Sometimes it's quiet. It's showing up. It's grounding someone in a world that seems bent on tearing them apart. My family had done that for me, and I had finally let them. As the night settled, I looked at the house, at the walls, the beams, the floors that carried memory and effort alike. This home, my life, my family, it was solid. It would endure. And in that permanence, I found something more valuable than revenge, more precious than validation, the knowledge that I was seen, I was known, and I would never be alone again. I closed the door gently behind me, stepping into the quiet night. The darkness held no fear. Only the certainty of home.